Welcome to the second episode of TC2 vs TF2 balance changes. If you haven't watched the first video, I highly suggest you check it out as there are a couple of rules that I won't be repeating here. But for all you newcomers, this is a series about the weapon changes made to typical colors, the Roblox counterpart to TF2. I want to reinforce the fact that this is not a video saying which game is better. I am simply looking at TC2's weapon rebalances and talking about whether they were good or not. Alright, now that that's out of the way, today we'll be focusing on the soldier or trooper. Starting us off, we have the Airstrike, renamed the aerial bomber in TC2. In TF2, you take 15% less damage from rocket jumps, fire nearly 3 times faster while rocket jumping, and gain a clip of up to 8 with 4 kills. However, you deal 15% less damage and your explosions are 10% smaller, with this number increasing to 30% while blast jumping. In TC2, the blast jumping bonuses have been changed to a 60% faster fire rate and projectile speed. Your max clip size has been reduced to 6, you only have 14 reserve, and you have a 30% reduced explosion radius at all times, not while just blast jumping. However, you do deal full rocket damage now. It still retains the concept of being a fun snowball weapon that depends on map design to do well, but the nerfs feel awful. The sluggish fire rate and minimal clip feel depressing, not to mention that in TF2, the Airstrike already runs out of rockets dreadfully fast. The lower reserve ammo in TC2's version seems like a really bad choice for a weapon type like this, and all of this is for a 60% faster projectile speed while airborne and normal rockets. In TF2, with some minor prediction skills, your target would not get away, like, ever. TC2's version is less fun and less effective, so no, I don't think TC2's version was a good change. Secondly, we have the Liberty Launcher, under the same name in TC2. TF2's version is a sad display of awful balancing. Its large amount of upsides shows it has 5 rockets, a 40% faster projectile speed, and minus 25% damage from rocket jumps, but is completely killed by the minus 25% damage penalty it has. It's obvious this weapon would get changed. In TC2, the reduced damage from rocket jumps is replaced with a 20% increased pushback, and the damage penalty has been reduced to 20%. I'm unsure about this, but in TF2, knockback is skilled based on damage, so the combo it should have with the reserve shooter is ineffective. But in TC2, I don't think knockback is skilled based on damage, so it's just a flat plus 20% knockback compared to the stock rocket launcher. Although I feel like the Liberty Launcher still has stats that are all over the place, at least it combos well with the reserve shooter and works as an actual side grade. The faster rocket speed and extra rocket are alright trade-offs for the lower damage penalty, and the knockback can be useful. It's an alright change. Now on to the Beggars Bazooka, renamed the Wrecker's Yard in TC2. In TF2, the Beggars' main gimmick is its altered firing type. You hold fire to load up to 3 rockets and then release fire to fire out your rockets 223% faster. Overloading consumes ammo from your clip and will cause misfires, allowing you to accomplish a technique known as overload jumping. On the downside, your rockets deviate randomly by 3 degrees, the explosion radius is 20% smaller, and you can't collect ammo from dispensers while this weapon is active. It also technically fires 33% faster than the stock launcher. In TC2, the Wrecker's Yard increases the 20% explosion radius penalty to 30% and adds an unlisted slower reload speed of 30%. When overload jumping, it takes ammo directly from its reserve, allowing you to chain infinite jumps, whereas in TF2 you only had 3. It also changes the firing type a bit, where projectiles deviate 1 degree for every rocket loaded, and that it only fires 70% faster instead of the 223% in TF2. The stats suggest TF2's fires a lot faster, but in practice the two feel very similar, so that's weird. I feel like TC2's changes are small but alright. The slower reload speed, fire rate, and explosion radius are pretty minor nerfs that are balanced out by a minor projectile deviation buff and ability to chain infinite jumps. The Beggars was balanced in its own weird way, and it's the same deal in TC2 with some minor differences. Moving on, we have the Mangler 5K, under the same name in TC2. In TF2, the Mangler does not require ammo, at the cost of dealing only 20% damage to buildings and mini-critting when it should crit. Its alt-fire consumes a full clip, but disables buildings for 4 seconds, inflicts mini-crits, and also inflicts 6 seconds of afterburn. In TC2, the Mangler has an extra rocket but has a 20% slower reload speed. Otherwise, the stats are all exactly the same. Honestly, the stat additions here don't change much. The Mangler feels the same here as it does in TF2, except maybe the breaks between fights, but that's pretty minimal, which begs the question, why? Not a bad change, just an unneeded one. Starting off our secondaries is the Righteous Bison, renamed the Personal Death Ray in TC2. The Bison in TF2 shoots a slow-ass projectile that deals seemingly random damage, with it being possible you deal 20 at point-blank range. There are a couple upsides, those being not requiring ammo, penetrating targets, and being unreflectable. Not requiring ammo and being unreflectable are kinda pointless, and penetrating targets is very situational. On the downside, you only have 4 shots and you deal only 20% damage to buildings. The problem here lies in the fact that the projectile moves slower than a ×10 brass beast heavy, and the damage output is oftentimes awful. It's obvious we need a change to this weapon. The personal death rate gets a couple additions, those being a 20% faster firing speed, 50% less fall off, and 60% less ramp up. Those changes make it so that you can fire a big wall of laser projectiles that deal better damage at mid to long range, but the biggest killer here is the changes to the projectile. It deals a base 30 damage that lands twice if it goes through a player, and is considerably faster, which was really the primary problem with the Bison. I think the change is pretty nice, a mid to long range penetration secondary. Now onto the Man Treads under the same name in TC2. This weapon is a passive boot item that has a lot of minor additions. There's a minus 75% reduction in push force from damage in air blast. You have 200% increased air control while rocket jumping, and you can land on enemies to deal 3 times your falling damage onto them. These are all nice upsides until you realize that this is not applicable to any rocket launcher except the rocket jumper, as you need to jump a lot to get these upsides, but that means taking self damage.
In TC2, we lose the increased air control and damage push force resistance, but in return you can reload faster, have full immunity to air blast, and also never take falling damage. Regarding the stop mechanic, that's an all-class mechanic now, so it's technically not gone. The fall damage resistance is huge for Trollder, and the air blast immunity and faster reload speed are great quality of life improvements, but this still has the same issue as TF2's Gunboats. It's not that useful for anything outside of Trollder. Don't get me wrong, fall damage is a step up, but if you're looking for a boot item with other rocket launchers, the Gunboats is still more applicable. It's slightly better than TF2's Man Treads, but both are still Trollder only weapons, and that makes this change kinda meaningless.
Ending off the secondaries is the Gunboats, under the same name in TC2. In TF2, the Gunboats are very simple. You have a 60% resistance to all self-inflicted blast damage, allowing you to take less damage from rocket jumps and allow you to make much more jumps with any rocket launcher. It's been a balanced side grade from start to finish. In TC2, the Gunboats retain a damage resistance, but also add a 60% fall damage resistance. Fall damage could scale dramatically with frequent rocket jumping, and this resistance decreases the risk of rocket jumping even more. Although the Gunboats weren't exactly unbalanced or underpowered in TF2, in TC2 it just feels so much better to use. Melee weapons are next, and here we have another stock weapon change. The change the stock shovel has in TC2 is that you're Gordon Freeman. In all seriousness, the additions we get are a 30% faster deploy speed and 50% reduction in push force while active. Although it doesn't seem that useful on paper, in practice it helps a lot. Being one of the only trooper melees with a deploy speed bonus, it allows you to quickly and safely deal with classes in your face that you don't have the time to deal with. It's a pretty useful change actually. Now it's the Hit Me Harder Daddy weapon, also known as the disciplinary action in both TF2 and TC2. In TF2 you have a 70% longer melee range but a 25% damage penalty, but the kicker here is the fact that you can slap your teammates silly and both of you move faster for a few seconds. In TC2 it retains the same stats but adds 2 additional ones. You have a 15% movement speed bonus but a 25% damage vulnerability while active. Although the whip was already balanced in TF2, I like this addition as a mobility tool when there aren't teammates around. Rocket jumping is still the more optimal choice, but it's nice to have a bonus all the time. A nice quality of life addition. Next up is the Equalizer, under the same name in TC2. The Equalizer is notorious. Get it? Notorious? Okay, if you get it, you get it. For being one of the worst melee weapons Soldier has. Your melee damage scales with your health, meaning you can deal as low as 30 damage at high health but up to 107 at life support. On the downside, you receive 90% less healing from medics while this is active. The problem with the Equalizer is that to get the most out of this weapon, you must be at your most vulnerable, and running with your melee out as the second slowest class in the game at single digit health probably isn't going to work in your favor. In TC2, the Equalizer has a base 15% damage bonus and also does not deal less damage if your health is high. It deals 75 damage if you're at high health and up to 123 at low health. However, you swing 25% slower and deal 75 damage to yourself if you miss a hit. Although I like the idea of making this more effective even when you're at high health, the problem here is that it's still a damaging melee on the second slowest class in the game and requires you to be at low health to be effective. And now you're more likely to die if you whiff a hit. It's an improvement to TF2's Equalizer, but it's still very underwhelming. On the other side of the pickaxe we have the Escape Plan, under the same name in TC2. In TF2, the Escape Plan brings your movement speed up as you have lower health, at the con of being marked for death and receiving 90% less healing from medics while this weapon is active. In TC2, the Escape Plan still brings your movement speed up with lower health, but it replaces all the downsides with a 20% damage penalty, a 15% damage vulnerability while active, and a slower holster and deploy speed as your health decreases. The escape plan in TC2 feels about the same as it does in TF2. The slower holster and deploy speed doesn't really matter as you will only pull this out if you have the chance and time to. The reduced vulnerability doesn't really matter as you're dead either way if you're caught, and the lower damage doesn't really matter because you should not be using this aggressively. The escape plan is still really good in TC2, but the changes were kinda pointless. Now we have a multi-class weapon for both Demo and Soldier, the Pain Train, renamed the Furious Flagx in TC2. In TF2, the Pain Train increases your capture rate by 1 at all times, but you also have a 10% bullet vulnerability on Wearer. The Pain Train isn't exactly a bad weapon, but it's very situational and oftentimes is not worth running over other options. In TC2, the Furious Flagx is unique in the fact that it is a sword-type weapon, meaning it has a 75% slower holster and deploy speed, as well as a 15% longer melee range. It also has an additional plus 10% movement speed while active. The Flagx adds a much more applicable speed boost that helps both Annihilator and Trooper on old maps now, although it still feels more situational than other weapons due to being objective based. Overall, a pretty cool change that brings the Pain Train out of extremely situational into only slightly situational.
Now we're jumping straight into the Market Gardener, under the same name in TC2. In TF2, the Market Gardener is pretty cut and dry. You deal melee crits while rocket jumping, but you swing 20% slower. It's a great weapon for both Trollder and for strategic picks on normal loadouts. In TC2, we get a couple nerfs. The weapon holsters and deploys 25% slower, you take 50% more knockback from all sources, and there's a 20% damage penalty that brings our crit damage down to 156. This might be a bit of a hot take, but I think the nerfs were mostly warranted. The hit reg and hitbox in TC2 is a lot more forgiving, and it doesn't help that rocket jumping feels a lot easier. It's still just as fun and it's still pretty powerful. In fact, the only stat I dislike is the holster and deploy speed penalty, as it seriously nerfs the smaller jumps you could make. Overall, it's an acceptable nerf, but it's less about the stats and more about Roblox's weird mechanics.
And ending us off is the Havesat Oichi, boringly renamed the Katana in TC2. In TF2, the Havesat has all the sword-type weapon attributes. It also heals 50% base health on kill. However, because of Honor Bound, if you draw this weapon completely and switch it away without getting a kill, you take 50 damage. There's also the instant kill others wielding it, but that's not that important. The Havesat has the problem of being pretty good on Demo and Demo Knight, but kind of pointless on Soldier. And no, Yomu Conch Strat does not count. In TC2, the Havesat retains the health on kill and instant kill mechanic, but it adds a weird 25% damage vulnerability and changes the honor bound mechanic. Rather than losing 50 health, you lose 25. I mean, that makes sheathing it less of a threat, which is alright, but the 25% damage vulnerability just sucks. Poor Trooper got caught in the crossfire of nerfing Demo Knight, and this weapon is even worse than in TF2. If anything, we needed a buff to make it viable on Soldier, but instead we got this. It doesn't kill the weapon, but goddamn is that an unnecessary change for Trooper. Well, that's Soldier over. I know I didn't include some weapons like the Battalion's Backup or the Reserve Shooter, and that's because I felt the changes were too minimal. As for the Frankenstein, that's based on pre-Jungle Inferno panic attacks, so yeah. If you have anything you disagree with, let me know in the comments, but that's all I have for you all. Adios.